I want to start with a statement of amazement. Baruch ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol niyah bidbaro.
Amen.
This is a statement of amazement. It is the beginning of all religious thoughts and feelings. To stand in total wonderment, amazement, even of such a small matter as drinking a cup of water. We cannot explain it. We can tell you what happens in your body, but why it happens that way, nobody knows. And so it is true about everything else in your and in my life. It is all amazing. We are living in an unbelievable, amazing mystery. And in many ways, as I will show tonight, the Jews are the center of this. In humility. But before I do that, it is obviously a great pleasure to see you all again after so many years. COVID, our move to Herzliya, the war, many other things which happened. So I'm extremely excited to be here again tonight. Shechianu wikiyamanu wikianu lazaman hazeh, not a small matter. And I want indeed to thank first of all my dear friend Rabbi Lopes, Mrs. Zhu, and over there on the other side, wherever she is, our dear Yael Shagar. I'm very pleased that my wife is here tonight, and some of my children, many others, and also very special, some good old Talmidim and Talmidot. I have been missing them, and I know that they have been missing me. Did you ever hear Beethoven's Nines? You remember how it starts? Pa 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 pa, pa 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 pa. Overwhelming in every sense of the word. Why do I tell you that? Because this symphony is the start of our creation. Only many times over. Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim v'et haaretz. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. That is a statement millions of times larger and greater than Beethoven's Nines. Pa 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 pa. Everything is included in there. Shamayim va'aretz. And then something very strange happens. In a matter of a second, the Torah no longer speaks about Shamayim. It tells us a little bit about the stars, very little, just their very creation of them, the sun, the moon, and it straight away focuses, the spotlight is on one very small little star, our globe. We know today that there are billions of stars. There is a whole cosmology out there. Not a word in the Torah about all this. We move on into the psukim of Bereshit. And we hear, V'ha'aretz hayata tohu vavohu. The world, this little star of ours, was upside down. And then in the next few lines, as you all know, we read about the 6 days of creation. Very short. Very little information is given. Definitely not any scientific information. And the Torah keeps on focusing more and more on a very little matter. The human being. Within one chapter, we are at Adam and Eve. Adam and Chava. And we read there about one of the tragedies which happens at the very beginning of human history. Whatever that means, man eats from the wrong tree. Very strange. There are millions of trees around. God says, only this tree you are not allowed to eat. And man says, I must eat from that tree. That is basically the nature of human beings. What is forbidden is exactly that what we want the most. Strange things. A little later we read about the murder of Cain and Abel, by Cain and Abel. 1/4 of the whole of mankind is wiped out. Then we read on afterwards about the Mabul, this terrible flood which nearly pushed the whole world out of life. Only Noah and his family and a few animals survive. Why? What happens over there? Torah doesn't say much about this. Only that it was a very evil generation. And we move on. Noah gets out of the ark and he makes a mistake. He starts to drink wine. He becomes sicker. And everything again goes wrong. Then there is the very famous story of the Tower of Babel, the Babylonian tower, where man wants to reach heaven. Our rabbis tell us so that they can kill God, create, or better kill this God. And man is being told that he can't speak anymore to each other, and that things fall apart. This, my dear friends, is extremely strange. From the billions of stars to one human being and a few more human beings, and everything, things crack down, till there is one man, Avram Avinu. And there the world changes. Avram somehow discovers God, discovers morality, ethics, and out of this little man with his wife Sarah, a nation, a very small nation comes about. First this is a family, then afterwards it is a tribe, and then it becomes a nation. And that nation goes up and down through history till the very end of Bereshit. The focus is only on that little nation and its problems. We don't hear a word about the galaxies. We don't hear a word about the Chinese, about all the other very large, enormous nations. Not a word. Later on in Tanakh, one of them is once or twice mentioned, like the Babylonians. But for the rest, silence. Total silence. Only one focus on a little, unimportant nation, which then a little later is called the Jewish people, the Bnei Israel. This is utmost strange, but it says something very special about this nation, us. Why is this? What is the purpose of this nation? Why does the Torah give all its attention only to this very little place called the globe of our world and this little nation called a family, tribe, and afterwards a nation? A small nation as it is still this very day. And the whole world is busy with that nation. Till this very day. We are mentioned everywhere and anywhere, at least in the West. And this nation, in their eyes, is not doing well. The strange thing about the story which happens today is that how more we try to be like the nations of the world, the more we get hated. the more we try to use their methods, the more they don't like us. We are at the moment in the middle of a moment of tremendous historical value in the fact that how more we try to be one of them and the more we try to move into the nations of the world, the more we get isolated. That's absolutely abnormal. That's not something which can be understood, at least not so easily. What is the purpose behind that? Why does this happen? Why has this always happened from the very beginning of the Jewish people till this moment in history? Even when miracles happen around us, as they no doubt did in this war, the more they hate us. What is irritating them? Why is it like that? I once said to my students, the biggest problem which we have is that we are the most irritating people in the world. Till this day. Let me show you something. There is a Gemara, a statement by the Talmud, in Megillah, in the tractate Megillah 6a, which says the following. Listen well, how interesting. Caesarea Jerusalem, if we speak about Caesarea and Jerusalem, im yomar lecha Adam, if somebody says to you, hear this, Charvu shtehen, that Jerusalem and Caesarea are both destroyed. Or Yashvu shtehen, or both go very well, do very well. Caesarea in Eretz Israel and Jerusalem. Al ta'amen. Don't believe the people who make that statement, that both of them do well or both of them are not doing well. But when it happens that afterwards Charva Caesarea, if only Caesarea is being destroyed, the Yashva Jerusalem, but Jerusalem is doing well, or the other way around, Charva Jerusalem, Jerusalem has been destroyed, the Yashva Caesarea, and Caesarea is doing well, ta'amen, believe them. That's the truth. If one does well, the other one does not do well. We have to realize, we have to understand, what did the sages try to say by this little powerful observation? Both doing well, forget about it. Both not doing well, forget about it as well. I think that the meaning of this obscure statement is this. It teaches us a fundamental issue concerning the meaning of history. What is the meaning of history and what is the meaning of Jewish history? Which really is asking the question, how do you preserve Jewish identity? How are the Jews staying alive against all the odds of history? How do we preserve, we would say today, the state of Israel, Medinat Israel? And the Talmud answers, there are two ways of looking to this. You can look this through the eyes of Caesarea, and you all know that Caesarea is a Roman city in Eretz Israel, but it's a Roman city. You can also look to Jewish history via Jerusalem, the Jewish understanding of history, the meaning of history. And both oppose each other. You can read all of history through the eyes of the Romans. You can read all the history through the eyes of the Jews, Jerusalem. But they will never agree, because there's a fundamental difference of opinion between the two of them. Jewish sovereignty, Jewish submission. Let me try to explain. We have a very strange concept, which many Jews don't realize. We have something called Keula, redemption. And we have called something which is called Galut, exile. Jewish history is built on these two modes. Exile is not just a locality. It is above all a mentality, a way of thinking. It's not just a matter of history in a normal academic sense of the word or a sociological sense of the word. It goes much deeper than that. Keula, redemption, is the belief that ultimately the Jewish people and the world will be redeemed. However long it will take, it will happen one day. But this idea that we believe till this very day in Keula, whether it is in religious terms or it is in secular terms, the fact is that it doesn't make any sense. Which nation keeps on believing in its Keula, redemption, when for thousands of years it does not happen? For thousands of years they are waiting. And the Jews don't give up. And even when they secularize, they do a very interesting thing. They create Zionism. Zionism is basically a promise of Keula, of being redeemed, even in its secular form, like the earlier Zionists definitely did. But the concept itself of a Zionism is, forgive me for saying that, totally absurd. Because nobody else in this world, after 2,000 years, still keeps on believing that we will be redeemed, or when we redeem ourselves, whatever way you want to take it. I'll come to that in a moment. There is no other nation in the world who goes through this kind of impossible belief in redemption which does not come. Even today, when we, Baruch Hashem, are living in this country, the truth about it is that redemption has not yet fully come. We're still fighting our way to redemption. It does not make any sense. But it is typically Jewish. Caesarea cannot live with that assumption. The Roman understanding of this world, the materialistic understanding of this world, does not know what to do with this concept of redeeming, of redemption. Why? Because in according to the laws of nature, or better, in according to the laws of history, if a nation is thrown out of its country, in our case nearly 2,000 years ago, there is no way of coming back there. It never happened anywhere. We don't even realize that enough. But it never happened there. It only happened to us. And the Zionist project itself is built on this unbelievable, absurd concept. We will go home. And if we are today still in great trouble because of the nations around us, then the answer is we will still continue to fight with a knife between our teeth. It doesn't make sense. Caesarea straight away says, stop here. It irritates us. We can't live with this. And on the other side, we Jews do something else as well. And that is this. Not only that we think about the past for the last 2,000 years and waiting for the moment that we are completely redeemed, which means to say that we never give up on the dream, and the dream is as much alive as it was 2,000-3,000 years ago. But at the same time, when we do that, we do something unusual, what I call meta-history. Meta-history means to say above the normal rules of history. It happens to us. And what is believed to be already true 2,000 years ago, when we were thrown out of this country, and from that very moment on, the Jews said, we will return against all the odds. And so we did. In other words, that was in the past a belief, is still the belief today. It is like we are pulling the past up to here and say, here we are again. We are living it now. And on the other side, when you think about the fact that we also happen to live in the future. In what way? That we sometimes celebrate all sorts of different great moments in history which still have to come. The Messianic age, it's not there yet. But on Shabbat, we already live it. On different Yamim Tobim, we already live it. Even when we were in Auschwitz, Birkenau, and other places, Jews happened to continue, whenever they had an opportunity, to conduct the Seder night. Next year we are in Jerusalem. In Auschwitz? And the Jew said, yes, you know why? Because we have another mentality as well, a Jewish mentality. Since we know that on the end we will be redeemed, why not celebrating it now? Right in Auschwitz. Right in Birkenau. The stories which you read sometimes about what happened over there are unbelievable. I cannot grasp it, but I know for sure it is true. We grieve about the past, but we do something else also. Whenever we grieve about today. I suppose you know all the very famous story, which seems to be true, that when Napoleon a few hundred years ago walked around in Paris, and he saw suddenly that the Jewish quarter in Paris was completely empty, and there was no marketplace, there was nothing going on, and he went into one of the synagogues, and he went up to the rabbi when he saw everybody sitting on the floor, crying. And he goes up to the rabbi and asks the rabbi, what's going on over here? What happened that everybody is crying? And the rabbi says, oh, it is terrible. The temple was destroyed. And Napoleon says back to the rabbi, but that happened 1800 years ago. So the rabbi said, no, it happened this morning. That's the way how we feel about it. Time, in our case, does not play a role. It is the way of looking to life which plays the role. By not having the temple now, means to say that we were not yet able to rebuild it, and therefore there's a problem of achshav. And so it has been true right throughout the whole of Jewish history. It is absolutely absurd that Jews, after nearly 2,000 years, are still on Tisha B'Av sitting on the floor, crying about something which nobody else in the world would ever cry about. Imagine that New York, God forbid, New York would be destroyed. Do you think that in another 200 years, the Americans will sit on the floor and cry? It's over. This has happened. Malasot. Not with us. We are a nation which actually lives beyond time. Time doesn't really play a role in the sense of saying this was this was the past, this is the future. And you know what is very interesting? We Jews don't live in the present. We are always busy with the past, or we are always busy with the future. And just as you know, if you know anything about philosophy, the philosophy of time, then you know that there is no such thing as the present. Because every present, however small, a millisecond, you can split it up in the past and in the future. It's not there. If I ask you, but are you living in the present? You will all answer, including myself, sure. But we can't put our finger on it. And that's Jewish history. We cannot put our finger on it because time is not what makes the essence out of the Jewish people. Jews have always escaped time. They became an eternal nation purely for one thing. And that is, since time didn't play a role, in the full sense of the word, they automatically belonged to the world of eternity. Abraham Joshua Heschel once said, eternity is broken up history. It means to say it is broken up time. Eternity means something beyond, what I call meta-history. The Jewish people, somebody once wrote, is always dying. But it never died. For Caesarea, for the Roman Empire, for the way how history is normally understood also in the academic world, that does not go. It irritates. We irritate the world because they do not know what to do with us. We are the exception to the rule. That doesn't mean to say that we should walk like this, but it means to say that it says something about whom we are, at least as a nation, not perhaps just as one Jew or one Jewish person, but as a nation, we constantly surprise the world. Then there is something else, which I'm sure you all know about. The contribution which Jews have made throughout history is totally out of proportion. First of all, we created the Bible. We created God, if you want to call it by that name. We found God. We taught it to the world. Afterwards, we had the prophets. We had Moshe Rabbeinu. We had so many other tremendous great things. And they all contributed, and first of all, that you find in the Torah itself, the contributions are completely beyond imagination. We are taking today the Torah for a fact, but if you really start to read that story, expressively the story of this little family, which suddenly brings over an enormous new idea of morality, of ethics, and of what we call the mitzvot, all that is completely unacceptable in the eyes of Caesarea. Western civilization has a problem with us. I once wrote an article in the Jerusalem Post many years ago where I wrote, we should have pity on the anti-Semitic world. Why? Because they don't even know why they are irritated by us. They lack the insight, the understanding of what really is happening with us, and it is badly enough that many Jews themselves no longer know. We got used to our uniqueness and it became normal. But it isn't. Milton Himmelfarb, one of the great sociologists, American Jewish sociologist in America, as far as I know, no longer alive, once wrote the following: the number of Jews in the world is smaller than a small statistical error in the Chinese census. This is very well put. And that's exactly the truth. We are so small, we should never have been heard about. There are many tribes in Africa which nouns, or better, its names I cannot pronounce, which are much larger than the Jewish people. Nobody has ever heard about them. Nobody speaks about them. And here we are with a few million people, and the whole world, or at least the western part of the world, is constantly busy with us. I tell you honestly, the truth is, at the time I come from, as you know, from a secular background, but this was one of my awakenings when I started to read history about the Jews, and I found this unbelievable thing. How is it that this little nation is always on the focus of the world? It made me to think that there is something special about this nation, And probably there is somebody behind that which seems to pull this through. When the non-Jewish world wanted to have a Mashiach, we gave them a Mashiach. And let me tell you something, and I say this with great respect. The truth about it is that only a Jewish boy could have pulled this off. You convince a world of billions of people that you are the Mashiach, when we are very clear that he is not. This is what the Jewish people are all about. Totally out of proportion, as far as the amount of people are concerned, totally out of proportion as far as the contributions which the world has accepted from us. Not only Tanakh and the New Testament, which by the way we also wrote, but also so many other things. And then later on science, psychology and so on, I don't have to tell you, we all know about that. Let me read you a statement by a famous Catholic thinker in London, in England. He's called Thomas Cahill. He wrote a book which is very interesting. It is a book concerning the gifts of the Jews. That's the way how the book is called. I quote, "The Jews gave us, the Gentiles, the outside and the inside. Our outlook and our inner life." Our means always the Gentiles. "We, non-Jews, can hardly get up in the morning or cross the street without being Jewish. We dream, we Gentiles, we dream Jewish dreams and hope Jewish hopes. Most of our best words, in fact, such as new, adventure, surprise, unique, individual, person, vocation, time, history, future, freedom, progress, spirit, faith, hope, justice, are the gifts of the Jews. The world speaks our language without knowing that they do. But it gives them meaning. And the meaning of meaning is that you live for a purpose. But today many people don't live anymore for a purpose. They just live. And that is a great, great tragedy. Interesting. When you look in Jewish history, who were our heroes? In a non-Jewish world, there were people like Julius Caesar, Herodes, and many other people. By us, these people, these particular heroes, are not our heroes. Avraham Avinu is a hero. Yitzchak, Yaakov is a hero. Moshe Rabbeinu, the prophets are heroes. They were intoxicated with God, by God. And since that day, they are teaching a lesson of tremendous importance which only a part of the world is prepared to accept. And that is that there are rules of the game of life. How do you live your life? Have you asked yourself the meaning of life? Do you know what it means to be alive? It is hard for Caesarea to work with these kind of notions. It is difficult because all of them focus on one thing, that life is not just given to be lived. It is to be lived in a way that it becomes tremendously meaningful, and that is one of the great, great, great messages of the Torah, of the Jewish tradition, Bichlal. What I'm saying here, my best friends, is that we are not a normative nation. We are an exception to the rule. To be honest, I'm not even so sure that I like that concept, but I can't get away from it. It is a fact right in front of our nose. And however much they hate us, the more they prove this point. Remember what Bilam said at the time when he saw all the people sitting around, all the Jews in the desert, and he said, this is an am levado. This is a nation on its own. And it is not counted among the nations of the world. My dear friends, this was written 4,000 years ago or something like that. It is true till this very day. Whenever you open your paper, you will read that particular message. Israel and the Jewish people could not have existed in the eyes by the means and by the philosophy of Caesarea. But that does not mean that everything goes well with us. How do you build something which on one side happens to be non-normal, meta-historical, and on the other side fit into the very normal and normative history in which all of us live? This is a very difficult question. You know what it says in Yecheskel, chapter 32. I read it straight away in English. God says there, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says there, for what enters your mind, it shall not be. He's speaking to the Jewish people. What enters your mind shall not be. As far what you say, we will be like the nations of the world, like the families of the land. And then God says, but I will rule over you with a strong hand, hear this, and I will not allow it to happen. You want to become a normal people? It won't ever work. 4,000 years of Jewish history has proven this to be true. It was the Netziv, one of the great Rosh Yeshivot of the Volozhiner Yeshiva, who once wrote the following. If it is a people content to live alone, the Jews live alone, faithfully to its distinctive identity, then it will be able to dwell in peace. When we keep to ourselves in the sense of knowing who we are and what we stand for, we will live in peace. But if Jews seek to be like the nations will not consider them worthy of respect. How more we want to normalize ourselves, the more we are rejected. This is a very strange concept in history, because it does not make sense. But you see it right in front of your eyes over here. And here we come to a most crucial moment in Jewish history, in modern Jewish history. There are two kinds of Zionism. There is secular Zionism, and there's religious Zionism. Now you must know, when I make these distinctions, they are not as black-white as I state over here, because there's a lot of gray between these two. But there was no doubt an attempt being made by the early Zionists, with all respect, to normalize our nation. To make it, once we were back in Israel, to be a normal nation, with a Knesset, with an army, with all what you need to run a normal Jewish state, or a normal state. And to be like Kechol HaGoyim, to be like everybody else. I remember at home, I come, as I told you before, from a completely secular background. My parents told me one thing. They were not Zionists. That didn't really work with them. But they used to say there's one very great thing about the Zionism, and that is saying it will make an end to anti-Semitism. It will make an end to anti-Semitism. I was constantly being told by my parents about that. Because once we are a normal nation, the people will accept us. As long as we stay apart, we will be having trouble. Now, today, you see something exactly the reverse taking place. Zionism is now used as the most important reason for anti-Semitism. All that what it promised, it could not deliver. And now we come to this war. We see exactly the same thing happening over here. And that is that how more we try to indeed fight, and we should fight by all means. The more we are being hated for being another, a different one, to be alone. But the nations don't understand. Therefore, they do not understand their own psychology and what they really happen from within. The very fact that the Jews are an exception to the rule. What is the mission of the Jewish people? It is such a terrible thing that today, also in the yeshiva world and in our school system, we nearly never speak with our children about what is the meaning of being Jewish. Why is there such a thing as a Jewish people? We teach our children halachot. We teach them chumash. I'm not even sure how well we do this. But there's one thing which is missing. And that is, why are we there? Why are we playing this unusual role? The answer is clear. It's complicated, but it's also clear. We are a nation of people who have a mission. The mission is indeed to bring God, the concept of God, to this world, to bring ethics to this world by way of the Torah. And somehow, for a very strange reason, while we are so terribly small, we should never have been heard of, we have had an enormous influence on this world, out of all proportion. But the mission is more than just a mission. It is a rescue operation. All of us are being asked to be part of a rescue operation. Of what to rescue? To rescue the world from all its evil and all of the bad things which happen purely because they have not accepted values of morality and of ethics. The meaning of life. That life is kadosh, that it is holy. That there is a concept called God, whatever that God may be. Indeed, of tzedakah, I can go through a whole long list of all sorts of different things which Jews have always stood for. And even when we went into exile and the non-Jewish world stopped us to speak openly, we at least continued to accept it, or better, to speak about it between us, among us. Leo Tolstoy, I'm sure you have all heard his name, the great Russian writer. I quote, "The Jew is that sacred being who has brought down from heaven the everlasting fire and has enlightened with it the entire world." This is a non-Jew writing. We are the most important sacred being, he says. We brought down the light of morality, and by that we enlightened the whole of the world in its entirety. He is a religious source, the Jew is a religious source, spring and fountain out of which all the rest of the world have drawn their beliefs and their religions. This is a non-Jew speaking, who had no reason to write this down. If you know an also very famous historian, a Russian historian, Nicholas Berdichev, who wrote a book about history, a very famous book. And there he writes about the Jews, and he writes between many also things. The survival of the Jews, their resistance to destruction, their endurance under absolute peculiar conditions are the fateful role played by them in history. All these point to the particular and mysterious foundation of their destiny. We are a very mysterious people. And now you come to a very big problem. If you are, how are you going to live among normal people? How are we going to do that? You know that there are many Jews, non-Jews in the world who believe that we are an empire in the Middle East, larger than Iran. Loads of them believe that. Why? Because we make so much noise in their eyes that they start to believe that we are enormous. But if you look on the map, you can't even find Israel. So small it is. It's difficult to discover it. You need magnifying glasses. We are ahistorical on one side. We represent eternity. We represent by that somebody eternal. And at the same time, on the other side, we are constantly being confronted with the normal world. The world of Caesarea, of the Romans, of the academic world, of which I am a part. And I love it. But it is Caesarea, it is not Jerusalem. And here's the problem which we deal with today. An enormous problem. Have you heard about Sir Isaiah Berlin? Sir Isaiah Berlin was a Russian-English philosopher, a very influential man in Oxford. And he did many good things for the state of Israel. He was not religious. I remember that Rabbi Sachs told me once that he spoke to Isaiah Berlin, and he asked him, why are you sitting on Yom Kippur in shul when you have said that you're an atheist? So he didn't answer. And a few hours later he came over to Rabbi Sachs and he said, you know what, I'm a philosopher, but perhaps I'm wrong. Perhaps there is somebody there, because when I look into the history of the Jewish people, it doesn't make any sense. Isaiah Berlin wrote the following words, I quote, "The Jews have too much history. The Jews have too much history and too little territory." This is a very important observation. We have much too much history. We have much too much eternity. But we have nearly no territory. And now that we came back 2,000 years later, we have to fight for this piece of territory like it is an empire. And now you have to do the following. And we are exactly in this problem. How do you make sure that you have territory, the land or the state of Israel, and at the same time you are eternal, you have eternity? These two nearly clash. That's exactly what Sir Isaiah Berlin said. You have so much history, so much eternity, so much unusualness and uniqueness. How are we going to put this into a normal situation of a Jewish state, if you want a Jewish secular state who has to fight, indeed, in every sense of the word, to hold on to that little territory which is so small that nearly nobody knows even where it is? Zionism is the answer to this problem, no doubt. But Zionism cannot exist without eternity. It cannot exist without the eternal dimensions of the Jewish people. To normalize our people is the most dangerous thing we can do. Don't believe for one moment that we therefore should just go for Orthodox Judaism as we know it in Goedslaarets. It won't work here, because we are living in very different circumstances, in the sense that we are a nation with a Knesset, with an army, with all the things which we absolutely need. But how do you make sure that the eternity does not get lost in the territory? This is a huge problem. And this war, which we had since 2 years ago, is a typical situation which has emphasized this in a most important way, which is shocking. We were always told that the Israeli army is unbeatable. This is not true. The last war has shown us clearly that it is not true. It failed. I myself have served in the Israeli army, and I'm very proud of it. But still, it failed. What we need to learn, which is very hard, is that if we don't give emphasis also on the eternal side of our territory, and not only on the material side of this territory, we will not make it. It is bad enough that I have to say this. Somewhere the army became an obsession. There was a time, I remember this, when we live already for many, many years here, when if you were not in the army, you were not even Jewish. But that's not true. Do I believe that everybody has to serve in the Israeli army? Yes, absolutely. But we have to know under which circumstances we need to do that. What is this army standing for? The army stands for a mission. It stands for a rescue operation. It stands for all the great things, the grandeur of what the Jewish tradition is all about. It needs to defend it. It must fight for it. But if we take that part of the eternity of the Jewish people away, and the army is not very deeply involved in that, I don't know what will happen. Tzahal has done tremendous things since the war started. And we cannot thank our soldiers enough for having done that. But I'm always surprised. I have grandchildren in the army. When they come home and they tell us the stories which happened to them, what they saw, there is this incredible pride of saying, I am able to serve in the Israeli army, but, and here's the big but, they had a religious education to a certain extent. How good it was, I don't know. Because I don't think that Jewish education is doing very well in this country, to be quite honest. Because we are not speaking about mission. We're not speaking about rescue operation. We're not speaking about the great, great message which we need to bring to the world. We are not here just for ourselves. We are actually here to serve mankind. But I hear little about this in our school system, and also not in the yeshivot, and I've been learning in yeshivot for many years. It is fantastic to learn Talmud the whole day, but you have to know how to learn it, and that's not just a matter of translating it and looking into Rashi and Tosafot. You also have to read between the lines of what it really says about the great mission of the Jewish people. It gets lost in the text. And it's terrible. You must remember, Tzahal has had since 1948 an enormous muzzle. It won all the wars. We paid a heavy price, no doubt. But on the end, we won all the wars. But do you know how much muzzle it was that we won these wars? You can plan a war as best as possible, but if you don't have muzzle, which in religious terms we would say hashkacha, we won't win it. We won't be able to somehow continue. I don't know if anybody of you has read the Winston Churchill's memoirs, or memoirs better. There he writes about what happened in the Second World War, between many also things. A remarkable writer, by the way, Winston Churchill. And there he constantly emphasized that when they thought that it will be the end of the British Empire because Hitler was stronger, somewhere a mistake was made on the side of Hitler in Maximo, and therefore they won. Was this planned beforehand? No, because nobody was thinking about the fact that Hitler would make that mistake. And if you look right through the whole of history, you will see this always happen. History is made of missed opportunities. Of that what should not have been, but somebody somewhere made a mistake and the whole thing turns over in another direction. That's mazal, or as we say in a religious term, hashgacha pratit. We Jews have to learn one thing. No nation can live with a borrowed identity. And I mean here borrowed identity that we should not try even to become like the others. They have their place in this world. They have a history which they have to play out and which is very important. But we have ours. And this has to enter into the army. I was in the army, my dear friends, with a whole group of Haredim, by the way. Gerer Hasidim. But besides that, our mafakdim, the people who were teaching us, were completely secular. They didn't know anything. They did not know what Yom Kippur was. I tell you, literally true. But they were fascinated. They came to me and to some others and they said, so what are you standing for? What is this all about? And I explained them as well as I could. And explaining them that we are a tremendous great nation because we have a mission which is far beyond the borderlines of Israel. And they couldn't believe it. They had never heard about that. I'm living in Herzliya at this moment with my dear wife. If you walk around there and you ask people if they're Jewish, they will tell you we are Israelis. Israeli is an extremely dangerous word because it has moved people away from their Jewishness. Even when you're secular, you have to know that you are Jewish. Israeli is your nationality living in this particular country. We are not fighting for a piece of land. We are fighting for a mission which is related to this piece of land. An idea, a great, marvelous, grandeur idea, which is basically our shlichut in this world, a rescue operation. I don't know if you heard about Michael Weissenkrot. Was a very famous Canadian philosopher, Jewish philosopher. He writes the following words in one of his remarkable books. He says, Israel becomes a full-fledged people prior to its entry into the land. We receive the Torah outside Israel and not inside Israel. It remains a people, it does not disappear after it severed from the land. Even when we were thrown out of this land, we continue to be Jews. This is, he writes a little later, sui generis, which means to say it is beyond any other case in history why this happens. Our very idea of law was given to us before the land was given to us. And the interesting thing is that if God forbid it would happen, that we would lose this land, we will continue to be Jews, but only when we understand our mission and that what we have been standing for all the thousands of years. The relationship, he writes, between the Jewish people and the land of Israel is totally unique. It does not fit any normal template. Many people have written about this and all realize that there is something highly unique about us. Not to be going around to say how unique we are, but to send the message that there is something going on, a power above us, which we realize is realized via us. We need to carry that particular mission to wherever we can. As a light to the nations, as an Am HaNivchar, a chosen people. And you know, I don't want to be overcritical, but not only is it true that the secular Zionists have misunderstood this, the truth is also that the Zionist religious have misunderstood that. Because something which has happened and has not been very much written about is that the Zionist religious concept was what we call in Hebrew, Eretz Yisrael Gedolah, the ultimate Israel, the wide borders of Israel. And that became one of their main philosophies. But that is a mistake. Israel is not the ultimate goal. Israel is a means to a goal. And if you make the Israel itself into a goal, that is forgive me for saying that, that's a form of avodah zarah. It is an idolization of the state and the land of Israel. One person who made this, with whom I totally disagree, but he made that point very well, was the famous Yeshayahu Leibowitz. The professor, the very, very original and very ironic kind of person. But he kept on saying, this is not why we are here. Israel is a means. It is not an end in itself. And now I come to the end of what I wanted to tell you. The Haredi world, who I know very well, I'm not part of it, but I know it very well and I appreciate for what it is, has a big problem on its head. As I wrote in the Jerusalem Post, for those who have read it, and that was very much criticized last Shabbat, and by a person who misunderstood what I was trying to say there, but that's besides the point. The issue is that now they have to learn, everybody of us has to learn, that we have to take our meta-history, our eternity, into our territory, into fighting for this territory. That we haven't done for the last 2,000 years. The Haredi world doesn't understand what it stands for. That's exactly the point which I was making in this article. Because what they should stand for is that we are a very special nation and that they send that message of holiness, kedusha, whatever name you want to give it, towards every secular Israeli. But if you speak to Haredim, as I do, they don't understand that. They don't know about it. Why? Because their yeshiva education did not give them that message. And it's a terrible tragedy. I personally believe, to be very, very honest, there will not be a way to get the Haredim to come into the army unless we prepare them for that. You can't force them into this. It won't work. On the end, the Memshala will lose this battle. But what you can do is to educate within the yeshiva world, a world where indeed this message becomes important, the light of the nation for the nations, to be inspired by what the Jewish tradition is all about. I've spoken with young men who learned in yeshiva for many years, and I love the yeshiva world. And I asked them, so how many masechtot, how many tractates did you already study? So they told me, Baba Batra, Baba Kama, and some Baba Metzia. So I said, okay, so you have been learning quite a few years. I said, sure. So I want to ask you a question. If a non-Jew or a secular Jew will come to you and will ask you, why are there Jews around? Why are you religious? My dear friends, nearly not one of them was able to answer that question. And that's a tragedy. Because it means there is something wrong with Jewish education. If we can't get our children, our Bachorei Yeshiva, to understand what we actually stand for. And I tell you something else. One of my daughters has a child, a young boy, who has to go into the army. At a certain moment, I heard this a few days ago from her, he asked her, Ima, what do you think? What is better, to serve in the army and become secular, or to learn the whole day in yeshiva? So I said to my daughter, from where does that question come? How is it possible? How can it be that young people who are learning in the yeshiva, the Haredi community is telling us today they are afraid that if they go into the army, they will become secular. So what kind of Jewish education did they have? How is it possible instead of exactly the reverse? And that is that when these young men go into the army, they should influence the others to become a little bit more Jewish or a little bit more religious. What's going on over here? It means that there is a basic problem within Israeli religious society. Once more, I love the yeshiva world. It's a fantastic world if you know it well. And I dare to say that I do know it well. And it was in the time many years ago when I learned in yeshiva in Gateshead in England, which I wrote about, where indeed you saw great people, majestic people walking around with one enormous grandeur which came from our teachers. I have no other word for it. And now, and this is what worries me terribly, is that the Jewish tradition gets a bad name because too many people do things in the name of religion which has got absolutely nothing to do with religion. How is such a thing possible? There's one answer to that. We must teach anew the Bachorei Yeshiva and others, including the secular people who need to learn what it means to be Jewish. And I tell you, there's a way of doing that. Set up a school for these young people and teach them not Talmud, just Talmud the whole day, but teach them the very integrity and the ideology of what Jewish tradition is all about. And you know, I will tell you one thing. If we would just take the books of Rabbi Sachs, the chief rabbi of England, right, who are now also translated in Hebrew, or is a fantastic writer, I was close to him, and they would teach that in the yeshivot would produce a lot of people who would be inspired, who would say, wow, if that is what it means to be Jewish, I can easily go into the army and nobody will influence me. I will influence these people. I heard that Yaakov Herzog said, and Nasi said, that indeed now we must teach these books in the secular Israeli school system. Halavai, it happens. You must hear the music. You must hear the Beethoven's minds behind all what the Torah is teaching us. If we can do that, we will have a different life and a different way of thinking. And perhaps we have to start all over again after this war is over and say, let's now move in one specific direction, and that is to say, let us inspire our children to be better Jews by knowing what it means to be Jewish, what our mission is, why we are there, and why we need indeed to live within this little territory, but with an enormous broad perspective about what it means to be Jewish. We are a protest movement. Rabbi Lam, the Yeshiva University rector, once said to me, you know what, we are the protesters, not the Protestants. And that's true. We are the protesters against all this manipulation which happens in this world, badly enough also in the state of Israel, where people are being influenced by things which are not what we are all about. And you know what? If a man does not recognize his own identity, he is lost. But if he does recognize his identity, he has a tremendous future in front of him. May HaKadosh Baruch Hu give us that opportunity. One last word. What I've been missing in this war, and perhaps is because I did not listen, or did not listen enough, is this. Golda Meir, many years ago, was once asked, would you ever forgive the Egyptians for having killed your sons? And she says, maybe. But what we will never forgive them is that they forced our boys to kill. This is a typical Jewish answer. And this is also later was expressed by Yitzhak Rabin, who was definitely not religious, but he understood. He said when he looks to our soldiers, they did not really enjoy their victory because they had seen the other side of how many people paid the price in the Egyptian and other armies. This we must constantly restate in the newspapers, on television, and saying also to the world, but first of all goes to ourselves, by saying, we hate war, we hate to kill, we are sometimes forced into this, but we will never forgive our enemies for having our boys being able or had to kill other people. It goes against our strain of thought, it goes against our morality, it goes against everything. It needs to be done. And we are holding in the middle of this. And we must make sure that this is known to every Israeli soldier, who I think do know, but Israeli society. We hate war. We don't enjoy war. We don't afterwards have big celebrations that we won. We are humble people who understand that on the end of the day we are an Am Kadosh, or we should be an Am Kadosh, and an Am HaNivchar, a chosen people. I thank you very much. Thank you.